Hello, welcome to Pyramid Plus Approach Session 11, Teaming with Families and Writing Functional Goals and Outcomes. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special thank you to the Pyramid Plus funders who make it possible for us to bring this important information to early childhood teachers and practitioners. Our agenda in this session, we will review the learning objectives and our logistics. There will be a video from Special Quest called Getting Services, where you'll have the opportunity to watch and hear the stories of families who are going through this process. We will have an activity, strengths, needs, and cultural discovery. We will be talking about how the process looks when you administer social emotional assessments. We will be writing a participation-based functional social emotional goal for a child. We will also be looking at writing family-centered goals and looking at the outcomes that we want to achieve through those goals. And I will ask you at the end to complete your thought seeds. Here are the learning objectives for session 11. And at this time, I would like you to pull out your handout, which is 11.1. That's on page 17 of your handouts for this session. First of all, participants will learn the skills for the strengths, needs, and cultural discovery conversation that needs to take place with families before we begin this process. Participants will also learn how to administer social emotional assessment tools with young children, parents, caregivers, and the team. We all want to be on the same page and have most of the same knowledge at hand when we are completing that process. Participants will learn skills to use assessment information to identify social emotional concerns and goals. And participants will learn skills to develop functional social emotional goals with the entire team. On handout 11.1, you'll see a comparison of IFSP, which is an individualized family service plan that is used with infants and toddlers, as compared with an IEP, which is called an individualized education program, which is used with children ages 3 to 6 or 3 to 5. And there are some differences as well as similarities in those two documents. First of all, I wanted to remind you of our ground rules and review the ground rules that we came up with at the beginning of our round of trainings this time. You need to be in a quiet place. Please mute your microphone except when you're speaking. We need to have cameras on so that we can see who wants to speak and acknowledge those who have comments to make. Please be sure you sign in on the chat function each time you come to class. That's our way of recording who is present. And please use the Vegas rule. What happens in class stays in class. We all need to maintain confidentiality with each other so that this will be a safe space. So as we are considering writing functional social emotional goals, we need to be aware that material for doing this is drawn from all of the different elements that were used to create the Pyramid Plus approach. We have Special Quest and building blocks and LEAP and SEAM, and you'll become more familiar with each one of these documents as we go through the trainings. Now I would like to show you a video. It's called Getting Services. And it is a video that was created by Special Quest, and it's called Building Relationships with Families. In order to get the most out of this video, you'll need to find handout 11.2, which is on page 19 of your handouts that you've received. As you watch the DVD, you're going to answer the questions, take some notes, and answer the following questions. These are on handout 11.2, but I'll review them here just so that you know what you are looking for. First of all, what issues arise during this initial identification process for families? So what is happening at the very beginning? What are some of the difficulties that they run into? Second question is, what supports do you think would help families as they begin this process of early identification? So think about that. And then finally, how can you personally provide leadership and support to address these issues? So please get out your handout and we will begin to view the video.
It wasn't until after my husband had left and he was out passing out cigars to celebrate the birth of a second daughter that the next morning the pediatrician that was working the rounds that morning came and said, you know, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but you have a mongoloid daughter, mentally retarded. And my advice to you is to institutionalize her. Put her in a home, forget you had her. You're young enough to have more kids and go on with your life. Otherwise, she's going to be a burden on your life because I don't think she's ever going to be able to walk or talk or be able to do anything.
A los 4 días de que nació, nomás empezó con calentura. Pero yo no sabía porque pues era la primera, no sabía nada. Y ella empezó a llorar y pues yo no sabía, pero pronto la llevamos, nomás que como en 1 hora y media llegamos al hospital. Y luego ya cuando la llevamos dijeron que si unos 5 minutos hubieran tardado, que ya no hubieran podido hacer nada por ella. Y fue cuando
we went home with this precious little child, and for the first year, everything was as to be expected. Matthew developed normally. He reached all his milestones when he was supposed to, you know, lifting his head up, recognizing us. A little bit after his first birthday, one of my aunts noticed that he was developing a little bit differently from my niece, who was 2 weeks younger than him. We went to a pediatric neurologist who at first examined Matthew, and everything just went over my husband's and mine's head. You know, really nothing he was saying made any sense. My attitude was, well, whatever's wrong, just fix it and let us go home. And he kept intimating there was something more than could be fixed. He was just about 18 months at this time. And we put him in hospital for a week. By the end of the week, after all the tests were done and completed, and the doctor sat us down and said he had bad news and good news. So he said the bad news was that after a week of tests and pretty intensive tests, it was true that they did find out that Matthew did have this very rare disease called Hurler syndrome. Each word he said, my husband and I just shut down, because my first reaction was, well, they have obviously made a mistake. They got some kids' files mixed up, and this healthy little child flirting with the nurses doesn't have this awful disease, and some child that they discharged, has this disease. And my husband was just in a state of shock. And finally, after he went through a long and lengthy description, he says, and the good news is, though, that you and your husband are young enough to have more children, and since Matthew will be dead in 6 months, you can go on with your life.
We're excited about getting the video of the ultrasound and being able to have that, and coming home and sharing that with the other kids was just going to be a real exciting treat for us. So we went over, and they had done an extensive ultrasound, so we were thinking it'd be like 15 minutes that we'd be able to show the kids. And so then when we had got done and we had already paid for the video, well, they said, we're not going to be able to give you the video. So we had asked why, and they said, well, you need to go see your doctor, and she has things to talk to you about. And so we had gone, and she had told me that he was going to be born with a birth defect called spina bifida. At that point, I had no clue what was spina bifida, how did it affect him. She says, well, do you realize that the extent of the damages could be so much where he would never live to be a day or 2 weeks or however old, not knowing until he was born. To be able to have somebody with special needs, I thought was going to be something special to me. If I could make myself do it, then I didn't see a reason why it shouldn't happen. Whether he was only going to live to be a day or a week, I wanted to be able to say that was my child for that 1 day or 5 days or however long it's been. And now it's been 3 years for us to say he's been such a great pleasure to us, that we've learned so much from him.
Concerned, and actually I lived in Connecticut and we moved down to Virginia, and my pediatrician in Connecticut at 15 months had said, I want you to think about putting them in a center or a program. The earlier you catch it, the better it will be for everyone. And I saw my pediatrician in Virginia, and he said, no, let's wait till they're 2. And it was, that mother's kind of gut instinct. I said, no, I don't want to wait till they're 2. I want to see someone. I want someone else's opinion, and I want to start working with them.
If you have a feeling that your child might have some type of disability, don't just sit down and cry and do nothing about it. The energy you're going to use crying, put it into action. By putting that energy into action, you will accomplish a lot, because then you will understand the process. And it won't be easy, the process. Nobody said it was gonna be easy, so, gotta be humble in that aspect. But it can be done, And I just hope that everybody who have the opportunity can use these services, because I'm a witness that Nelson had improved a lot, a great deal.
I had a friend that she didn't have no help or nothing. She had the same condition of mine. Tell her, let's go to my nurse manager and let's see what can she do for you. And I'll tell her what kind of doctors I'm seeing and see if she wants to see them, or bring her here to this daycare and tell her that they help me out a lot and they'll do a lot of things for the baby.
One day after, days and weeks passed, Mark and I noticed something. Matthew got up every morning like he did a second before this prognosis, as he did after. Every morning he wanted to watch Sesame Street, he wanted his Cheerios and cheese, he wanted his orange soda, he wanted to go out to play. Nothing had changed with him. He was still this little boy, and we were still his parents. We were still parents who, if anything else, had to give this child a childhood. We realized we had to get back on the track of living, because you know, if we lost Matthew, we would have an eternity to grieve him, but while he was here wasn't the time to do that. So we went back to just being parents and just treating him like a little boy.
Please pause watching this video and stop to record your reflections on handout 11.2. When you're finished with that, then we can proceed and go on. So as we are working towards creating some goals for the children that we work with in our classroom, one of the things that we need to remember is that families really are the people that know their children best. Yes, we see them 5 days a week for periods of time. However, families are with them always. And families are very important in the person that their child becomes. It says here, emergence of social emotional competence occurs within the context of the child's family, community, and cultural experiences. Those things make a huge difference in who the child becomes, and it's important for us to consider that as we are working towards helping children to achieve their greatest potential. We need to remember that families do know their children best. And most of all, families can share experiences that are very different from the ones that the child may have in the classroom itself. So they may have a little different lens that they're looking through to consider where the child's strengths are and where the child's needs may be. Now what I'd like you to do is to pull out handout 11.3. That is on page 21 of your handouts for this session. Handout 11.3 says strengths, needs, and cultural discovery on it. With this document, what you are going to be doing is considering the information that you have in your vignette materials. And you are going to be using this document, particularly the second page, which is on page 22. It says discovery for, and I will be requesting that you spend some time now with handout 11.3. Look through the materials that you have in the vignette materials that have been provided to you for a given child and their family. And you will need to figure out what is the primary need that this child has, what strengths are available either through the family or the child themselves, what strengths do they have? And then we need to think about how does the family culture relate to this particular need, and how could it contribute to the child meeting a goal for development around that need. Although you will not be having a conversation per se, I would like you to take the time to do a little bit of analysis with your particular vignette and think about the things that you think, what are the strengths that this child and family have, and how could those be applied to help that child achieve a goal related to the need that is in evidence. So please pause the recording for approximately whatever it takes you, about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit less because there will only be one person. But please pause the video and take the time to complete the discovery page in handout 11.3. And then we will move on. Now that we have some information about the family, how are we going to start this process? If we suspect that a child has a particular social or emotional need that we should be addressing, how are we going to prepare for that? First of all, we need to collect data. We need to gather information from as many different places as possible over time. We need to choose what kind of an assessment tool we're going to use and who's going to be on the team to administer that assessment tool. We want to make sure that we explain why we are going to go through this process and what may happen as a result of the process being completed. We want to be considerate of the particular strengths and understandings that each family member brings to this process, as well as if there are certain caregivers involved, like grandparents or even floater teachers who come in and out of the classroom who may get involved in this process. We want to make sure that everyone ends up being on the same page and that we're listening to input from everyone. We want to frequently take the time to make sure that everyone on the team is understanding everything and is participating as fully as possible. We may find that there are certain questions that are really developmentally irrelevant on some of the assessment tools. So though it's okay to skip those questions. You may find that certain questions are culturally inappropriate for this particular child. And again, it's okay to omit any questions that are not culturally appropriate for a particular child and family. So there's some things we want to think about as we look at assessment tools. First of all, we should be able to repeat it several times in order to be able to assess where we are in the process of reaching a child's goal. It should be easy to use, easy to score, so that everyone that's on the team would not find it impossible to use it themselves. We don't want it to be too expensive, and it does need to be research-based. In other words, reliable and valid. And it also needs to be able to tell us when we need to intervene, what particular intervention might be needed, and when we repeat it, whether or not the intervention is making a difference in that child's developmental status. There are several formats that we can use when we are doing formal assessment. There are checklists, frequency counts, rating scales, there's interviews. There's also play-based assessments. What we get out of checklists are how many skills or how many incidents occur. Frequency counts, how often does this happen during a given period of time? A day, a week, an hour? Rating scales will tell us how intense the behavior is. Interviews are very useful to give us context information. And the play-based assessments will give us accurate information about where the child stands compared to their peers, because play-based assessments are the most comfortable for the child to participate in. One example of an assessment tool is the Social Emotional Assessment Evaluation Measure. In other words, SEAM, S-E-A-M. It is a curriculum-based assessment. There are versions for all 3 ages that we work with in early childhood. There's 2 questionnaires. First of all, there's the child benchmarks and assessment. It can either be administered by a parent or caregiver, or it can be administered by a professional caregiver or teacher. The parent caregiver version is just all one version. There's no age differences. The professional use is divided into infants, toddlers, or preschoolers. There also is a questionnaire that allows us to make note of adult or caregiver benchmarks that we're looking for. And if you look, the way the system may be set up, there's a handout 11.5. This handout is located on page 25 of your handouts for this session. What this does is it lays out how the framework may work in your agency. First of all, you administer a screening. We use the ASQ, social emotional, which red flags children who may need further assessment. Then you can give the child the SEAM assessment, which will lead to some goals that you will be developing for the child. Then the goals are, we implement some form of intervention to help the child reach the goals. And then finally, we evaluate where we are in the process. Is it working? Is it not working? If it's not working, we may go all the way back to developing a different goal or a more appropriate goal, or we may go all the way back to administering the SEAM assessment. So it all begins with the screening and then the assessment itself, and we develop goals from that assessment. We then do an intervention, and then we evaluate how successful we've been in that intervention process. Here's an example for infants. Baby initiates and responds to communication. If we were to mark this very true, that would mean that at least 75% of the time, baby initiates and responds to communication. If we marked it true, it would be between 50 and 75% of the time. Somewhat true would be marked if the infant responded between 25 and 50%. Not true would be marked at between 0 and 25%. We are going to check if it is a concern. We're going to mark that. If the child is either somewhat true or not true, then you might want to check it as a concern and think about whether or not you would want to create a goal for that child to work towards based on what the data is that you're collecting. When we move on to the toddler age group, those same percentages hold true. Toddler lets you know if he needs help, attention, or comfort. So again, if they score in the very true or true range, it might not be a concern. If they score somewhat true or not true, it might be a concern. Again, it might be that you'd want to look at context to determine whether or not it's something that you would want to create a goal for. For preschool, Here's an example of one of the items on the preschool seam. Child shares and takes turns with other children. And again, you're going to want to collect data from as many different sources as possible, determine where the child would fall on this rating scale, decide whether this is a concern or not, and also whether this might be an area that you would want to create a goal for. So once you've administered the SEAM, you would review the results with the person who is the parent or caregiver. You always want to start by restating the strengths and concerns of the child, concerns that you have about the child. You want to make sure that your perception as the professional is in line with what the caregiver believes is happening, and discuss that if necessary. You're going to gather information from as many different sources as possible before you review these results to make sure that they are as accurate as possible. And then after you talk about the results of the assessment, you're going to want to determine, with the help of the parent or caregiver, where do we go from here? We want to determine whether the delay is great enough that we want to intervene. And then we want to start working towards what goals do we have in mind that this child needs to work towards with our support, and what are we going to do to intervene to help that child. There are a number of different things that you might do as a professional having this conversation with a parent or caregiver. You might just be providing information and support. You might be just saying, here are some folks that you can call to get extra help with your child's speech. You might be wanting to report the results to an outside agency if the needs are severe enough that they might need immediate intervention. You would want to get some extra support from the experts. You might involve the parent in talking about prevention, promotion, identification, and intervention. But overall, what you're going to be wanting to do with that parent is to develop what we call functional participation-based goals. And we're going to be wanting to use evidence-based practices to teach this child the skills that they will need to meet those goals. So there are 5 different components of social emotional goals: functionality, generality, instructional context, measurability, and are they participation-based? We'll go over each one of these components individually here. First of all, what's functionality? What this means is we are going to be looking at whether or not this skill is going to increase the child's social emotional abilities within their daily routines and environment. So are they going to be able to use this in their current life? Will the skill help the child become independent, and are the behaviors needed in order to get through daily routines? If you have a child, for example, who does not understand or doesn't seem to be able to follow directions, they might have a goal set up around following directions for washing hands, following directions for setting the meal table, getting ready for nap, all of the usual daily routines that you go through in a classroom in a day. We also want to make sure that whatever goal we set for that child is directly linked to a concern that either you or the caregiver have about the child's ability to function. So the second part, the second component of a social emotional goal needs to be generality. And what this basically means is, can the skill be generalized across a variety of settings? Can the child use this skill both at home and at school? Can the child use the skill during routines as well as work time? Can the child use the skill when they're out in the community playing with peers? So in other words, can this skill be used throughout a child's day? Will it be something that will help the child learn how to modify the way they respond, even as settings, objects, people, and conditions change? So we want our goal to be generalizable. In other words, usable wherever and whenever the child is. In addition, we want to look at the instructional context. Can this skill be taught in a way that will reflect the manner in which the skill will be used? If we are trying to increase the child's fine motor skills, for example, so that they can hold a pencil properly, can we teach it in such a way that will be strengthening the particular fine motor assets that the child has so that they can hold a pencil? So you might think of using tongs to move something, to develop that pincer grasp. That's just a simple example of a way that a skill could be used in an instructional context. Also, can this skill be elicited easily by both the parent or the caregiver and the teacher during activities and routines? So is it something simple for us to ask the child to do? And will the parents be able to ask the child to do the same thing? We want that goal to be measurable. It has to be easy to see or hear. We have to all agree on the definition of what it looks like, and we need to be able to count how many times the child exhibits this skill or practices this skill. In addition, the social emotional goal needs to be participation focused. In other words, a child has got to be actively involved in this learning. It's not something that we are going to sit and lecture the child about. It's something that we are going to be allowing them to practice and be actively involved in order to learn this new skill. And it needs to be appropriate within the context in which the skill is needed. So we want to make sure that all children are going to be actively involved in their own development. So there are some steps that we can take if we want to write functional participation-based outcomes, okay? First of all, we need to think about, all right, what does the child really need to be engaged, independent, and social in everyday routines and activities? What are the gaps that exist in this child's bag of tricks, so to speak? We want to take a look at what concerns we have and what the potential outcomes need to be. Think about what routines might be involved in teaching that skill. And then we have a very specific template that we use in order to make these goals as useful as possible to all of us and as clear. We will write it in this way. The child will participate in this routine by, and will describe what they're going to be doing. We will know this when he or she, fill in the blank, what are they going to be doing? Then we're going to add a criterion or the extent to which the child will demonstrate the behavior. across times, places, people, situations, or materials. So we will add some sort of criterion about where, when, and how the child is going to be providing this or going to be practicing this skill. We'll add a criterion specifying the amount of time that the behavior is going to be demonstrated. In other words, in 1 week, in 1 month, however long we think it will take for the child to practice the skill frequently enough to really have that skill accomplished. And then we are going to consider how easily they're going to be able to replicate that behavior and how long we're going to expect them to keep it up. So we might say within 3 minutes, or in keeping up with their peers. As far as maintenance goes, we might talk about the child being able to repeat this behavior over a period of 1 or 2 months, depending on exactly what our goal is. So those are all the different elements of a functional goal. So the resulting goal are goals that will be easy to place in an IEP or IFSP document. They will identify a skill that's essential for the child to accomplish. It's going to be very specific about what the child is going to be doing, and it will be very active involvement for the child. It's going to identify where and when the child will be practicing this skill. In addition, we are going to come out with a goal that's important for the child, the parents, and the teachers, and a goal that is actually measurable. And if you pull out your handout 11.6a, which is on page 27 of your handouts for this session, and 11.6b, which is on page 29 of your handouts for this session. These are checklists that you can look at in order to determine whether the goal you have written is actually going to meet all these requirements. So when we're writing goals, we want to make sure that they're clear, that they're very professionally stated, that they use active language. In other words, we're focusing on what we want the child to do, not on something we want the child to avoid. So we will be using positive language as well. We will be actively involving the child in this process. We're going to make sure that it's relevant to the context of home and school, and that it's participation focused. Here are some examples of goals, social emotional goals that were written for some different children. Luke, who is 3 years old, will participate in breakfast, lunch, and dinner by feeding himself independently. We will know he can do this when he uses his hands to pick up a spoon to put at least 10 bites of soft foods in his mouth at each meal for 1 week. So there you see it has all of the different required components of a well-written goal. Another goal. Keenan, who is 9 months, will participate in meals, playtime, and routines, such as diapering, bath time, and waking up, by looking at caregivers and babbling. We will know he can do this when he looks at the caregiver and babbles 3 times during 5 activities per day for 1 week. And here are some additional goals. Sahali will calm herself when upset by taking 3 deep breaths during upsetting events, such as when she has to share a computer, train, swing, cannot have more snack, has to line up to go home. We will know she can do this when she takes 3 deep breaths and remains calm during 3 upsetting events for 5 consecutive days. Again, you're going to be seeing a pattern here in every single one of these goals. They all have all of the different components of a well-written goal. Jorge will participate in group activities by singing, imitating movements, taking a turn, commenting to a peer or adult, or engaging with the materials. We will know he can do this when he participates in 10 minutes of circle time, snack time, table time, and story time for 3 days over a period of 1 week. All right, so now I'm going to see if you feel that each one of the goals on the next few slides meets all of the requirements for a functional goal. Is it functional? Is it generative? Is there an instructional context mentioned? And is this goal measurable? So thumbs up or thumbs down, think about this one. Hannah will maintain eye gaze with a caregiver for 4 seconds each day. Is it functional? Is it generative? Is it showing us the instructional context in which the skill is going to be practiced? Is it measurable? Can everybody agree on whether or not this has happened? So in order to analyze this particular goal, we're going to pick it apart a little bit. We're going to start out by assessing functionality. What does Hannah need to be doing? Why does she have this goal? She needs to look at things in the environment. Okay, that's our goal. What are the concerns and what are the informal outcomes? Mom wants Hannah to follow objects with her eyes that she sees in the environment. Okay, what routines are involved? Diapering, dressing, playtime, after bath or nap. So we write a goal by saying Hannah will participate in diapering, dressing, and playtimes with mom. Okay. Okay, this is the part where we have to be very specific about what the child is going to do. By looking at and following the objects, diapers, clothes, toys, etc., back and forth with her eyes. We need to add a criterion for measurement. We'll know this when she can do this, when she follows an object back and forth 5 times. So yes, that is measurable. Then we want to add a generalization criterion as well. She will follow 3 different objects back and forth 5 times during 3 routines. So we want it to be generalized across 3 different routines that she participates in throughout the day. We want to add a criterion specifying the amount of time that the behavior is demonstrated. So we would say in 1 week or in 1 month. And then finally, we want to consider the fluency or maintenance of it, and we'll expect her to continue this for 2 months. So there you have a much more complete goal that we've put together. Here's the result. Here is what we came up with after taking each one of those steps. Hannah will participate in diapering, dressing, and play times with mom by looking at and following objects such as diapers, clothes, and toys back and forth with her eyes. That's her active involvement. We will know she can do this. This is where the generalizing comes in. When she follows 3 different objects back and forth 5 times during 3 routines in 1 week. Okay, that's where we are putting in the time frame and how long will we expect her to maintain it. And she continues to do so for 2 months. So there you have a complete, well-written goal. Okay, here's another example which we will pick apart a little bit. Charlie will initiate and maintain interactions with peers during free play. Do you say thumbs up or thumbs down? Does it have all the necessary components of a well-written goal? That is my question to you. So let's assess the functionality and development first of all. What does Charlie need to be doing? He needs to increase peer interactions, okay? What are the concerns? Parents and teachers are concerned about her lack of positive interactions with peers. They're worried about her. So that's where the concern lies. What routines would be involved in encouraging her to interact more with her peers? Free play, outside time, snack, those are all times when children have a lot of freedom to interact with each other. So we would write this: Charlie will participate in free play, outside playtime, and snack. Okay, so that is our generalizing. By, what's the action the child is going to take? By talking to and sharing toys or materials with peers. We have to add a measurable criterion. We'll know she can do this when she has 10 positive social interactions with her peers, such as talking or sharing toys. Then we add the generalizing part. She will share toys and material or talk to 3 different peers during free play, outside, and during snack. Now we need to add the amount of time that the behavior is demonstrated. Per day for 3 consecutive days. Okay, so we are going to be expecting Charlie to do each one of these things each day for 3 consecutive days. How long are we going to expect her to maintain it? Now we put in, and continues this for 3 months. So now we have all of those different components. And here's the resulting goal. Charlie will participate in free play, outside playtime, and snack by talking to and sharing toys or materials with peers. We will know she can do this when she has 10 positive social interactions with 3 different peers, talking or sharing toys during free play, outside, and during snack per day for 3 consecutive days, and continues this for 3 months. So from now until the end of our Pyramid Plus approach training, you will be working with a vignette of a family and a child. This has been provided to you. It's a separate handout. And you will be using that family vignette to do the next activity. So you need to pull out the family vignette that you were provided with. And you also need to find your handout 11.7, which is on page 31 of your handouts for this session. It says write a goal and outcomes. And what you're going to be doing now is spending some time going through the material in that vignette, and you're going to write a goal for this particular child. You're also going to be focusing on what the outcome is going to be for the family. Okay, so first we're going to write a goal for the child, and we're also going to figure out what kind of a result, what kind of a consequence will this have for that family? What's it going to help that family be able to do? So you have those 2 things that you will be working on during this activity. So I would like you to pull out your handout and spend some time, pause the video for now, spend some time writing a goal for the child in your vignette. Also, write what you think the outcome is going to be for the family if the child is able to accomplish that goal. When you're done, start the video up again. So we have reached the end of session 11. There is a handout 11.8, which starts on page 33 of your handouts for this session. If you would like to find more resources to work with around this particular topic, there are some wonderful resources from TAXI, from CEPHL, from the pyramid model, all of them related to writing functional outcomes-based goals. So here are our major messages for session 11. First of all, it's very important for us to be engaged in relationships with families. We do not want to start a conversation like this one with a family if we don't have a good relationship with them. So one of our first goals when a new child starts in our classroom is to begin building that relationship with the family. It's absolutely key to whether or not their child is going to be successful in our classrooms in early childhood, as well as in classrooms once they go on to elementary school. It's recommended that you use an evidence-based screening and assessment tool to identify the needs of the child. We want to be really clear about what the child's strengths are and what their needs are before we start this process of intervention. We want to make sure that we understand what the needs are of the family, which is why we want to take a look, a very careful look at what the culture is that that family is part of. So we want to make sure that we do both of those steps before we start down this road with the family. And then finally, if we create goals that have all of these different components, they need to be functional, generative, instructional, and measurable. If we create goals with all of those components, we are much more likely to be effective in our intervention and our support of the child achieving that goal. Thank you for your attention. Now, I would like to ask you to please pull out your handout 11.9, which is on page 35 of your handouts for this session, and complete the questions on the thought seeds. What will I change in my behavior? What will I apply to the families and children? What will I take back to my team in regard to this topic? So take a little bit of time and complete your thought seeds, please. Thank you very much for your attention throughout session 11. In addition, I would appreciate your feedback as far as what went well today in this session. What did you like about the material? And if you have suggestions for improvement, please address those in an email to me. Thank you very much.